Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Hey Coach Tony. I'm your host, Tony Fiorino. Oh, boy. Each week here on Coach Tony, we talk about the hottest topics in and around youth sports. And as always, we love to hear what you have to say, so we open up the studio lines. 855-HEY-COACH. That's 855-439-2622 if you got something to say. Boy, what a week for football coaches. Unless you have, listen, one of the worst things about having a sports show is that sometimes you have to cover stories that you disagree with, or in this case, just make you sick. So unless you live in a cave, you have heard about the recent scandal surrounding Penn State, Jerry Sandusky, Joe Paterno, the whole football program, and the whole administration basically in general. It turns out, if you are one of those folks that live in a cave, and some of my listeners do, Sandusky, longtime coach at Penn State, has been implicated in a series of incidents involving sexual misconduct with underage boys. Most of these incidents took place either at Sandusky's house or on the actual grounds of Penn State, even in the Penn State football facility. Well, this in and of itself is deplorable. And a strong enough punishment for someone like this does not exist, in my opinion. However, this situation took what can only be described as the darkest turn imaginable when it was discovered that college football legend Joe Paterno had been informed about these incidents and knowingly kept Sandusky around and in the presence of more young boys. These facts took what was already a worst nightmare scenario for amateur football and turned it into what is probably going to become known as the biggest scandal in college football history. Paterno did report this to the authorities at Penn State. Namely, he reported to the athletics director, Tim Curley, the senior VP of finance, Gary Schultz, and even college president, Graham Spanier. I don't want to rehash the whole story because it's been in the news all week. And listen, I know you already know the story. I just wanted an opportunity to speak with you all about the various aspects of this case and pose some questions to see what you think. So again, the studio lines are already open at 855-HEY-COACH. It's 855-439-2622. But before we get into things here, I'm very pleased to announce that joining me in studio this week to talk through all these points is longtime listener and contributor to the show. You know him as Steve from Katonah. For you loyal listeners, Steve needs no introduction. He's called into the show many, many times, always gives sound opinions on various topics. So this week, Steve and I actually emailed back and forth a couple of times on this, and as the email started to fly, I asked him to join me in the studio so we could bat some things around. So Steve from Katonah, welcome to Hey Coach Tony. How you doing this morning?
Tony, thanks very much. I'm happy to be here. Great to be on the show for the first time, and I'm looking really forward for the next hour.
Yeah, it should be a blast, and it's going to go by so fast you're not going to realize it. But Steve, while this whole topic engulfed the sports media world all week, it seems the most heated point of contention throughout the whole week really focused around the firing of Joe Paterno. Now, I personally thought this was a no-brainer, but I quickly learned, like anybody else who had been on any of the online forums, there are a lot of supporters of Joe Paterno. As unfortunately evidenced by the riots that took place on Wednesday night, right after the announcement of his firing, and the crowds of people who have gathered outside his home yelling the "We love you, Joe" and all this other stuff. You know, as a non-media guy, Steve, I got to ask you, when you first heard about Paterno getting fired, what was your initial reaction?
Oh, geez, I guess the initial reaction was, say it ain't so, Joe. Just say it ain't so. Because, I, like many, my first reaction was to support Paterno. I have loved Paterno for years. I'm a diehard Notre Dame fan, but he is, Penn State's my second favorite school, and Paterno by far is my favorite coach in any sport. Not because of what he does for the sport itself, but what he does for the kids involved. I've heard him being interviewed after games where they, had lost for the first time of the season, be knocked out of a national championship picture, and, said, "Joe, what are you going to do now?" And he's like, "Hey, we lost a football game. It was just a football game." So he viewed it as so much more than just football. It was life. So it's been, it's just been terrible.
Well, it's been a struggle, and what you said is not uncommon. A lot of people that I talked to when the story first broke, and most people aren't sitting around following the news wires, most people said the same thing. wow, how can this happen? Why would they fire Joe Paterno? He was going to resign at the end of the season anyway, blah, blah, blah. Well, needless to say, and Steve and I talked a little before we got on the air, the more you look at the information that has come out, the easier it is to understand how and why Joe Paterno got fired. And you're going to you give me a say it ain't so, Joe, referring to Shula's Joe Jackson. Well, I got to tell you, part of me thinks this is clueless Joe Paterno.
Clueless Joe. Gee, we go from Shula's Joe to clueless Joe.
Clueless Joe.
You know, let me first say that this is a tragedy of an epic and unspeakable magnitude, and I don't refer to Penn State in that. I refer to the victims involved. I mean, so that's first and foremost. I think the main concern here, it's just what these victims must have gone through for the last 12 years. And I so badly want to defend Joe. I did read the grand jury report, and I was shocked. I was floored.
That's the second response everybody says. I really wanted to defend Joe Paterno, but then I read the grand jury testimony. And the grand jury testimony is damning to say the least. And again, the more you peel back this onion, the more you realize that, you know what, I'll ask it in the form of a question, because this is the one question. And by the way, Steve and I are going to be back and forth on this, but I want you to call in, because there are a series of questions I want to pose today. And the first one is this, and there's some debate around this one. Did Joe Paterno fulfill his obligation by reporting this incident to the powers that be, the AD, the senior VP, and the president? 855-HATE-COACH is the number if you want to chime on this, but I'm going to ask you first, Steve. Did Paterno fulfill his obligation?
It's a loaded question. Let me say this. Paterno was first told of these allegations in 2002, and at that point, Sandusky, right, had been retired for basically 3 years. He retired in '99, I think. So Paterno did tell the AD. He also told the senior VP of finance, I think it was.
Yeah.
So Paterno had not witnessed any of these incidences. Obviously, didn't participate in the brutal criminal acts, the disgusting criminal acts. Did he do enough? I firmly believe in his mind he did what he thought was right. I firmly believe that. In many of our minds, it was not enough, but I think he did what he thought was right.
I ain't buying it. I think it was good that he reported it to the powers that be, but let's face it. And again, you want to disagree with me, guys? Call in. But let's face it. Joe Paterno did the minimal amount. The barrier to entry was telling somebody about it. Joe Paterno could name a building on that campus. Joe Paterno has classes. There's a Joe Paterno class at Penn State. That guy could, if he ran for mayor, hands down would win. He could change the curriculum of that school if he wanted to. He reported something and then kind of turned away and hoped it would just get better. And you know what? It didn't get better. It got worse, and it got worse for more kids. The grand jury report talks about 8 kids. The number was last reported to be up to 20. Last night, I hear that there's now a kid in Texas that Sandusky apparently had a little fondling on for a road game.
Let me for Sandusky, listen, he needs to rot in the general population jail cell for all I care, until he dies, which, by the way, might be sometime this afternoon with the way these Penn State fans may react to this whole thing. As for the AD and the senior VP that Paterno told about these allegations, let them rot in jail as well. I think that's where they belong. As for McQuarrie, I can almost issue him a pass if he was 22 years old or 20 years old, but he wasn't. He was 28. So why don't we put him before the firing squad as well? But
here's where it gets really touchy, because McQuarrie tends to be, and McQuarrie, by the way, is the wide receivers coach for Penn State. McQuarrie is the guy who, and by the way, I'm going to sound like a real moron throughout this show, because the verbiage in the grand jury report is disturbing. As a father, I find it disturbing, but McQuarrie was the guy who walked into the shower room and basically witnessed Sandusky doing something as inappropriate as can be done to a 10-year-old boy. Right. Immediately that night called his dad, which you can understand that. The next day called Paterno, went to Paterno's house, and described what happened. The only reason I talk so much about McQuarrie is, A, he has not been officially fired. I think he's on paid leave now is what they're calling it.
He's in hiding.
Well, you should be, because...
Agreed.
But you know why, though? And here's where listen, I'm losing my top already. He's getting death threats. And I'll bet this guy's in the worst possible position because he's getting death threats from people who are supporting the victims, which, by the way, if you don't support the victims, not a hot enough place in hell for you. But he's also, I'll bet, and they're not saying it, I'll bet he's getting death threats from Penn State fans. If you'd kept your mouth shut, Paterno would have never gotten in trouble, and it's probably the case.
And if it is, you're right. There's not a hot enough place in hell for them. That's I hope that's not the case. But
well, and getting back to McQueary, and like I said, this is kind of where I get a little bit bummed here. He went, and there are a series of quotes that come from Paterno this past week that make you wonder if the guy is an idiot. But you know what? I knew this was going to start already. We're going to start to get some of these calls because, listen, the show's all about you guys. I believe we got Courtney calling in who's on line 1. So we're going to go to Courtney. Courtney, you're on Hey Coach Tony this morning. How you doing?
I'm good, thanks. How are you?
I'm great. So, loaded question. What do you think about all this?
I think the best thing to say right now is that as an alumni here in State College, I'm proud to be a bigger, part of this bigger situation. I'm Penn State proud, but I have a heavy heart.
Well,
the environment here is like any other football Saturday, but I think the moment of truth will be when we get into the stadium.
Courtney, where are you calling from?
I'm actually in the parking lot here tailgating in State College.
Oh, you're all right. So you're going to the game today?
I am.
Okay.
I'm actually,
so what's
oddly enough, I had this trip planned for months. So
too late to yeah. Those tickets aren't a hot item on eBay right now. But let me ask you a question. What's the environment there?
The environment is business as usual. Everyone's tailgating, having a good time with their family and friends, and everyone's in good spirits.
Now, I got to ask you only because you're there, and it may not be evident yet. There was this whole talk about blue shirts versus white shirts, the Bloods versus the Crips, and I was afraid that it may turn into that. Apparently, people who are in support of the victims are supposed to be wearing light blue shirts today, and those supporting the administration are supposed to be, or Penn State in general, are supposed to be wearing white shirts. Are you seeing any of that?
Well, it's kind of hard to say because if you wear white or blue, I mean, everyone's got their gear.
No, but it's supposed to be powder blue, like I hate to say it, like a North Carolina blue.
I don't see anybody wearing powder blue right now.
That's either discouraging or nobody got the memo.
I don't think anyone got the memo.
Okay.
I think I live in New York, and all week we've been hearing to wear blue. And I actually work in fashion. I didn't hear a specific shade of blue. This is the first I'm hearing about it.
So what are you wearing? Wow, wait a minute.
I'm wearing dark blue.
Coach, don't go there.
That sounded so inappropriate. I'm sorry, I don't mean to laugh.
I'm wearing Penn State blue.
Penn State blue, okay. So, and listen, by the way, Courtney, something that's important to note, and you are what I would expect from any Penn State alum. There's a major separation here between the football program, the faculty, I should say the administration, and Joe Paterno, where you say, God, so much good has been done, and it has. A good buddy of mine is a Penn State alum. This is eating away at the very heart. And by the way, even guys like Jimmy Kennedy, I don't know if you know Jimmy Kennedy. Jimmy Kennedy played defensive tackle at Penn State and is now playing for the New York Giants. He's been on my show before.
Right.
I reached out to Jimmy because he played for not one but two legends. In high school, he played for Tony DiMatteo, and then Tony was instrumental helping him go to Penn State and playing for Paterno for the very reason you would hope he'd go there. I said, Jimmy, what do you think? And his response, and if you were on my Twitter, at Hey Coach Tony, you saw Jimmy's response. Jimmy just said, sorry, I can't talk about this topic. It's heartbreaking. That was the first and last word from Jimmy.
It's been really difficult. I feel like everyone's going through the grieving stages. You get angry, you get sad, and then you remember the good times you have at State College, and you remember all your friends and the good experiences you had, and it's hard.
Courtney, you're forgetting one stage of all this, which a lot of people are still in, and that's denial. There are people who are blindly supporting Joe Paterno. And you know what? I'm going to ask you this, as hard as it is to ask a Penn State alum. Did Paterno do enough?
No.
Wow, I guess it wasn't that hard.
It wasn't that hard, Tony.
I think that nobody did enough, but I think if there's a silver lining in all of this, it's made us all have those difficult conversations with each other.
Yeah.
What would you do, and what are you going to do going forward? And You just don't know until you're in the situation. But I think right now everyone's transparency has been exposed.
Well, Courtney,
every program.
As a New York gal, thank you for calling in, and as a Penn State alum, thank you for calling in. By the way, you can be my eyes on the street. If something transpires there that you think we should hear about, call us during the tailgate or whatever. If you see some powder blue facing off against some white shirts, please keep us informed if you can. If not, have a kielbasa on me and try your best to enjoy the game. Thanks for calling.
Will do. There's a gentleman selling I Love Joe Pa t-shirts right now that has a picture of Joe on the front with a big heart around it, and people are buying them. So.
Well, you know what? Buy me one because I'm low on toilet paper in my house. All right, Courtney, thanks.
I love Joe.
All right, you know what? We'll hold off. Hold off on the I Love Joe stuff. We got to get to a break. We'll talk about this when we get back. This Joe Pa thing ain't going away.
Thank you, Courtney.
Yeah, Courtney, great call. Thank you for chiming in. Listen, guys, you're with Hey Coach Tony. We'll be right back.
Coach Tony.
Hey, welcome back, everybody. You're with Hey Coach Tony. This and every Saturday morning, 9 a.m. on AM 940 and AM 1510, as well as live online. You can get to the Facebook page, which is Hey Coach Tony on ESPN Radio. You can post your thoughts up there during the show if you're too chicken to call. There's a link to listen live to the show on the Internet as well. So we kind of keep all our stuff there. Right before the break, Courtney called in, and aside from coming across as inappropriate when I asked her what she was wearing, Courtney did tell me that somebody is selling I Love Joe Pa shirts with a great big heart around them. Well, Steve was chomping at the bit, as was I, but you know what? You're the guest, Steve. What I Love Joe Pa? Really?
Listen, I love Joe Paterno. I think Paterno has done so much for so many. If you talk to, you could talk to his entire alumni class that ever played for him. So many of them are going to say he treated me like a father. He changed my life. He helped me with this. He helped me with that. That doesn't, what went on, it doesn't change that he did so much for so many. I am not endorsing Joe. I am not endorsing what he did at all. But, was he perhaps, did they jump the gun on his firing? I don't know. So much of this is kind of a media attack in a sense.
Wait, hang on, because you know what? A lot of people are saying it's a media attack. It's not, and the reason is, first of all, if you want to make a lot of money at State College today, go around selling iron-on letter D's, because you know what I would buy? I loved Joe Pa. As a dad, what Joe Paterno did or failed to do is, in my mind, it's unconscionable. The crimes that were committed against these young boys, next to murder, is the worst possible thing a human being can do. He could have. Now listen, to get to your point, to get to your point, is Joe Paterno the greatest college football coach ever? I think yes. Did Joe Paterno shape the lives of many young men? Yes. Did Joe Paterno do a lot of good things in his life? Yes. Did Joe Paterno forever taint his legacy based on his inability or lack of desire to act? Yes. Did he when it came time to do something that was tough, to basically walk his talk, he failed, and he failed miserably.
I can't disagree with that. And again, I'm not endorsing the guy. When I said a media attack, one of the things I found just not amusing would be the wrong word. One of the things I found strange about the whole scenario here is that the university announced it was forming a committee to determine the facts surrounding the allegations after it had fired Paterno. So they're going to fire Paterno, then we're going to find out what happened here. It's just part of the way the media operates, which I find, again, would Paterno ultimately have been fired, or should he have stepped down? I think that's probably the case. But the media can have such a negative impact on so many things. I mean, not even just football. Take what's going on in Europe, for example. I mean, the business press comes out and attacks Greece. Once Greece is in a shambles, then they go after Italy like a pack of attack dogs, and Spain is next. I mean, it's the media.
Listen, we in the media, and while I'm not really good at it, I am considered a journalist. I am in the media. We look for. Thank you. We do look for compelling stories and edgy stories, whatever the case may be, and that's neither here nor there. When it comes to you talk about, did they form committees? Did they go fact finding enough? Let's be really clear about this. Top of the pyramid of evil, Sandusky. Period. Like I said,
Agreed.
I'll go so far as to say if I saw the man, I'd attack him.
There are a few things that would make me kill somebody. This is one of them. Right.
I would attack him. On behalf of parents everywhere, I would attack him. And I'd go to jail, and I'd gladly go to jail. Okay. Below that, and here's where the real problem is, Paterno is being, to an extent, vilified when he reported this stuff to the powers that be. If they had followed through in the way they should have, Paterno would be smelling like a rose. I get upset because they didn't, and Joe Paterno didn't step up and say what's going on. He should have. Now, point being, any institution, and when I say it's institution, I mean in the grander scheme of things. Catholic Church, great example. And here's where half of the people get pissed off and turn off their radio, but hear me out first. I'm not drawing the parallel of little boys being raped. But if the shoe fits, let's wear it. Any of these institutions, universities, whatever, when these things first come out, when they first get reported, what do they do first? They protect themselves first, try to sweep it under the rug. That's one thing the Catholic Church and Penn State have in common. They both said, wow, little kid being touched, let's shove it under the rug. Let's transfer a priest. Let's, figure out a way to let this never be heard of again. It's never going to go to criminal charges. The last thing they do is step up and say, now we're going to do something about it. Too freaking late. You tell me, you know what? Tell the kid who got, again, I'm going to sound stupid. Tell the kid who got assaulted after Sandusky got caught and this whole thing got swept under the rug. Tell the mom and the dad of the kid who got touched next how great Joe Paterno is.
Can't do it. I completely see your point. It's irrefutable. And Tone, I think we're on the same page in here. I'm trying to say that, okay, Paterno, he is not a social worker. He is from a completely different era. I don't want to sound like I'm defending him. I'm not.
But you bring up a good point. He's not a social worker. You don't have to be a social worker. Shut up a second. This guy comes into your office and says, and Paterno tried to hide behind, he didn't say exactly what happened. Steve, I'm not the brightest guy in the world. You come into my office and say, Sandusky was doing something in the showers that was inappropriate with a 10-year-old kid. What the next words out of my mouth are, what exactly happened? And even if you don't ask that question, what the hell could be inappropriate in a shower with a 10-year-old kid?
What? Being in a shower with a 10-year-old kid.
Being in a shower with a 10-year-old kid is inappropriate.
No, listen, Tone, again, we're on the same page.
Social worker.
No, we are on the same page. I'm trying to find some...
I know what you're doing. You're like everybody else, including me. That is, I'm telling you, man, I was hoping I was going to have...
I'm devastated, yeah.
I was going to have a... what the hell's the guy's name on Dallas? Patrick Duffy played him. JR. Not JR. Whatever. I was going to have a Dallas moment where I was just going to wake up today and this was all a bad dream. Right. Because tell me you could possibly fathom that Joe Paterno would sit on his hands and not just do anything he could possibly do to make sure Sandusky, his buddy, was brought to justice.
Tony, I can make an argument that Paterno is almost as guilty or even as guilty as Sandusky. Part of the reason is Sandusky's got some sort of illness that normal people can't comprehend, but he's got some sort of illness that he can't control. Paterno could have actually done something about this.
And he didn't.
And he didn't. So I can see your point there, without a doubt.
And by the way, if you're going to call the show and tell me Sandusky got an illness, give me your address because I'm going to come to your house. I'm going to smack you around with a rubber hose. Illness? Illness.
You're not going to call that an illness?
Yeah, that's why, illnesses like that, you can support euthanasia. How's that?
In that case, I do. In that case, I certainly do.
If you haven't, I'll say it again. If you have not read the 20-something page grand jury report, get your hands on it, and it's going to change your complete outlook on this thing.
It will.
People you know what's really funny? People are starting to say, should Penn State get the death penalty? I mean, like SMU. You can argue. Listen, Ohio State football players go and get a couple of free tattoos, and we're crucifying those guys. Kids are getting raped.
Right.
And Penn State's playing today.
They may be getting a death. I mean, recruits are going to back out of there left and right. Number one,
it's happening.
Okay, and Moody's last night, put their bond revenue rating on watch because they said the revenue going to the university is going to be drastically reduced.
Ticket sales, enrollment, you name it, TV revenue. There are going to be repercussions. My wife said, "Oh, Penn State is just going to, they'll be fine, business as usual."
No.
And what sucks, I can say sucks. Our first caller, Courtney, said, how did she describe the environment? It made my stomach turn. Business as usual. My wife, Mima, who is never right. She is never right. Guess what, honey? If you're listening, you're right. Business as usual. And what pisses me off, these are the same people who 2 nights ago destroyed their city, turned over news vans, and now it's business as usual because it's game day?
In support of Joe Pa, right?
Go burn your bra, your draft card somewhere else. These idiot kids who are students at Penn State, who were rioting, who are saying, Joe Pa, he's great. Joe Pa did nothing wrong. Save those online comments, and in 15 years, look at them again, and you're going to want to jump off a freaking bridge.
Most of these people do not have children. And it changes everything when you do, because again, there are a few things that I would murder somebody or I'd kill somebody, and I think this is one of them.
And I don't even think you have to have kids. I think you got to have a brain. I think these college kids were so excited to have something to riot over that they did. Our football coach got fired for not making sure a kid toucher got brought to justice. So let's turn over a news van. Let's start some fires. Let's riot.
Everybody's got a cause, Tone.
Yeah, ridiculous. Brain damage. Brain damage. All right, listen, we are flying right by here. We come back. We're going to talk a little bit about. Let's talk about whether or not Penn State as an institution is culpable. Let's talk about whether or not the football program as a whole deserves some repercussions here. So stick around. You with Coach Tony.
Coach Tony.
Hey, welcome back, everybody. You with Coach Tony and Steve from Katonah. And we're talking about this Joe Paterno thing. During the break, we got a couple of calls, and I believe I think we're going to go to Ian, who's calling in from Wyoming. Ian from Wyoming, you're on. Hey, Coach Tony, how you doing this morning?
What's going on, Tony? It seems like the only time we ever talk is when we're dealing with parents that are vilifying a 9-year-old girl like we did back in February, and now...
Oh, so this is guys. This is Ian. This is Ian St. Clair. He is an award-winning feature writer and a columnist with the Wyoming Tribune Eagle in Cheyenne, Wyoming. So I don't know how many Ians were in Wyoming. I didn't want to assume it was you, but hey, how you doing, man? Listen, we were just going to start talking about some of the culpability or lack thereof, or repercussions to the program in general. Some people are starting to use the term death penalty for Penn State football. Man, what do you think?
I'm one of those people that thinks that it needs to be thought about seriously. I mean, you give a team like SMU the death penalty for paying players, and everyone was associated with it in SMU. But this is something that is just disgusting and horrendous and inhumane any way that you think about it. And the fact that it was allowed to happen from 1999 on is completely it renders people speechless to think about it, that it was allowed to happen.
I'm not going to disagree with you here, but I will tell you, and this is where people are going to wonder if I just changed hats. Here's where there's a line that needs to be drawn. What happened was just deplorable. There's no way to describe what happened there. When you start talking about holding the actual program accountable, here's where I got a problem with it. I think the program should be accountable when something illegal involves the players. I think what happens when you have situations like this, where coaches are culpable for something they do or don't do, it's easy enough to cut out that cancer. This, I think, would be a case of penalizing the players for the actions of their coach. And I think, while I think something, boy, you want something, I'm going to say it, you want something bad to happen to these people, but not the players. You know what I mean? I was starting to wave the death penalty flag myself. Then I started thinking about it. And what are you going to do? You're going to hold a kid responsible for the actions of an adult. It should work the other way around. You know what I mean? And that's why I think, Jim Tressel and the other programs that have received the death penalty, it's because the coaches were made to, and rightfully so, hold the bag for the actions of the kids. The kids here did nothing wrong. There's not a single player implicated in any of this. This is all coaches, assistant coaches, and administration from the school.
I understand all that, and that's a good point that the kids weren't a part of this, but Joe Paterno continues to make this about him. To this day, to this minute, he continues to make this about him. He wants to go out as a martyr. He is making himself a martyr by continually allowing people to say, we love Joe Pa, we love Joe Pa. I mean, this guy that Courtney was talking about that has I love Joe Pa t-shirts, Joe Pa needs to come out and say, this isn't about me. If he was this great leader of men that he and everyone else claims that he was, he needs to come out and say, this isn't about me.
But you know what, Ian, hang on. Ian, hang on a second, because here's one of the things that really pissed me off about Paterno. He did that when it was convenient. If you remember, one of his first quotes, which drove me up a wall, the committee shouldn't be worried about me. Let's worry about these victims. This isn't about me. He didn't want it to be about him because there was nothing solid yet. So he thought he could kind of walk off into the sunset. You remember the quote? These guys should not, I think it was something like, don't spend a minute about me. That's when it was convenient. So I know what you're saying, and I'm just having some fun with it. Now, it is about you, Joe, but not in the we love Joe Pa, let's hold hands and sell T-shirts crap, because that's not what it's about. It's about Joe Pa, and I'm not going to say that again. Worst nickname in all of sports. Joe Paterno failed miserably in fulfilling his moral duties, period.
The inaction is just as guilty as the action in my mind. Because he has known about this since 1999. There was an interesting story that I've heard that when Sandusky had his retirement there in 1999, Joe Pa, I'm sorry to say that, Tony, I know how much you hate it.
Paterno.
When Paterno was at, he obviously went to Sandusky's retirement there, spoke for no more than a minute, and didn't stay for the whole thing, and he left. He knew in 1999 what was going on.
Yeah, of course.
And then again in 2007, when he hadn't been, this is Sandusky, he hadn't been with the program for 8 years, in 1999. He was, and this is after McCreary and Paterno knew about what happened in that shower. In 2007, McCreary and Paterno were on the practice facility during a practice, and Sandusky was there with another kid. It's just...
He would take him to bowl games. I mean, just when he retired, most of this stuff, believe it or not, happened on Penn State grounds. And by the way, like I said, anyone can go. By the way, Ian, thanks so much for the call, man. I really appreciate it. Most of this stuff, Steve, happened after Sandusky was no longer employed by Penn State, and it still was happening on Penn State grounds. This was still locker room. This was still bowl games. This was still road trips.
Tony, we just get an email here from Ted in Albany, and it says, he disagrees with kind of my stance on Paterno. And again, I'm not endorsing it, and I'm just kind of trying to point out another side. But Ted says, don't forget that in 2002, Penn State football was coming off one of their worst seasons ever, 4-5. At the time, Paterno was 72. He nor Penn State could afford to have this be made public. And he said, although Sadansky did retire 3 years prior to that, he was a top assistant in line to take the coaching job at Penn State. He retired immediately after the then DA investigated allegations of child abuse. Now, the email goes on to say, one last thing goes on to say that Paterno allowed Sadansky to keep his camps, but it couldn't be done on Penn State campus. So
there was so much, you're right, and the part that jumps off the page, there are two things. First of all, Sandusky was perceived as next in line to the throne. This is public knowledge, so Ted, thank you, but what Ted didn't mention is Paterno, for whatever reason, told Sandusky he was not going to get that job. That is a fact. But what Ted does say, and that's what a lot of people don't know, is Penn State swept it literally under somebody else's rug. They said, you can still have 10-year-old boys in your camps taking showers. Just don't do it here. And that's, like I said, the more you hear, and some of it is innuendo, some of it is insinuated, some of it is implied, but you know what? There's enough smoke here that we're all going to die from smoke inhalation before the fire starts. Come on, listen, I'll say it. Sandusky is as guilty can be. He did admit, but the mom who really brought this thing out, basically said she let the police eavesdrop on a phone call or two. Right. And one of those phone calls, she just said, and it was just for a pound of flesh, she just said, promise me you're not going to shower with any more kids. Sandusky, the moron, instead of saying, okay, said, I can't promise you that. Are you kidding me? I can't promise you I'm not going to shower with more kids. How does that guy not get thrown in jail right there?
Where was this guy's wife during all this? I mean, he was molesting kids in his own basement. He was married, wasn't he?
Yeah, I mean, he had like a little man cave, like a little private bedroom downstairs in the basement, and apparently these boys who would sleep, this guy had more kids sleep in his house than Michael Jackson. And what happened, he would go downstairs after the kids were supposed to be asleep, and again, I can't go through the verbiage. He would, under the guise of cracking a kid's back or getting a muscle knot out or wrestling. Apparently, this guy should have been a wrestling coach because he did more wrestling to get behind young boys than Jimmy Superfly Snuka. I mean, this is just ridiculous. And like I said, here's the part that gets me. Joe Paterno allowed Sandusky. He said, basically move your pass, punt, and sodomize camps down the block. Just don't do it here.
It's a terrible way to put it, but in effect, I wish it appears that's the case. I mean, really, it does. And again, a legacy of a guy who seemingly did some great things is just not only tarnished but destroyed.
It is destroyed. It is destroyed because that guy who was writing the book, and we're going to talk. When we get back from break, we'll talk some more about this stuff. But I'm just going to finish up on a point or two here before we go to break. There are two major crimes that took place here. One is obviously the sexual assault on numerous young boys. The count, I believe, is up to 21 alleged cases. 21. That is a crime that is, like I said, death penalty is too good for this guy. I want to see Sandusky live to be 120 years old, and I want to see him suffer every day. I want to see him, to use a term from Shawshank Redemption, I hate to use, this reference twice. I want to see him in the basement of Shawshank Prison with the sodomites every day for the rest of his life. How do you talk? I mean, like I said, sometimes being a journalist stinks. My wife was like, "Do you really want to do this show?" I was like, "No, I don't. I really don't want to do this show." But how can you not? How can you not? A youth sports show, how do you not talk about one of the most disgusting atrocities that involves kids and sports that has ever taken place? That's what this is going to wind up being.
It is the worst. And you're right when you say it's going to evolve into the largest scandal. If you can even call it a scandal.
This isn't done yet. There's so much more information that's going to... I mean, by the way, if anybody is not sure where Sandusky is, because people broke through cinder blocks through his windows. Sandusky right now is probably hanging somewhere by shoelaces. Yes. And that pains me. Not because he's gone, not because he's going to kill himself, but because I want him to suffer. Right. As a parent, and if you don't like it, I don't care. Don't listen to my show. I really want this guy to suffer. Do I want Joe Paterno to suffer? No. Joe Paterno screwed himself out of legacy.
I think Paterno is suffering. I think Paterno is suffering greatly because he knows he made some really stupid decisions.
And thank you for saying that, because I've had people say Joe Paterno is suffering, his legacy is tarnished. No.
I don't think he cares.
If that's why he's suffering, then suffer some more.
Right.
He's suffering because he knows.
Agreed.
He knows he easily could have and should have, and forevermore, which Joe Paterno outside of Penn State football, if he's dead in 2 months, I wouldn't be surprised.
Agreed.
But the remainder of his life is going to be filled with regret, which is the worst of any human emotion, period.
I think you made a great point. It's not about his legacy being tarnished. He's too good a guy for that. I think he knows.
No, he's too good a football coach. He's a great football coach. What he ruined forever is his legacy as a human being.
Right. Okay. His football coach, his record stands on all, but he realizes how stupid he was.
It's not stupid. It's immoral. Oh, by the way, when we get back, you got to remind me of this. I am a Steelers fan. By the way, look at that. Got another Steelers shirt on today. When we get back, I'm going to talk about the article I read that I choked on my own vomit. I had to call 911, do the Heimlich. I choked on my own vomit. We get back, we're going to talk about one of the most famous former Pittsburgh Steelers, who happens to be a Penn State alumnus, and his opinion on this whole thing. You're with Hey Coach Tony. Stick around. We'll be right back.
Coach Tony.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Hey Coach Tony. I'm Tony Fiorino, your host. You should feel free to join me every Saturday at 9 a.m. to talk youth sports. This week we're talking about the whole Penn State scandal, and before break, I alluded to something that's going to make us all vomit, and so we're going to jump right into it. I just got this yesterday. Former Penn State great and former Pittsburgh Steeler great, legendary running back Franco Harris came out and basically solidified something my mom told me when I was a kid. She said, you're not very smart, so you can either keep your mouth shut and be comfortable that you're not that smart, or you can open your mouth and prove to everybody that you're not that smart. So Franco Harris decided to go on record, and as a as a Steeler guy, purebred, love it. As a Steeler guy, sick to my stomach. I'm going to go through some of the things that Harris said in this article. One, it starts with, and I quote, I feel the board made a bad decision in letting Joe Paterno go. I'm very disappointed in their decision. I thought they showed no courage not to back someone who really needed it at the time. They were saying the program their statement is that the program under Joe was at fault. They really wouldn't give a reason. They're linking the football program to the scandal and possibly the cover-up. That's very disturbing to me. I think there should be no connection to the football program, only in the case that it happened at the football building with an ex-coach. There's more to this, but let's just start with that one. First of all, there's no connection to the football program. A football coach sodomizing kids, another football coach witnessing it, and the guy who basically is representative, he is synonymous with Penn State football, doesn't follow through. How do you not connect the program? The program is connected. The players are the only ones that weren't involved. That's not what really bothers me. Harris says, they showed no courage not to back someone who really needed it at the time. You know who needed to be backed at the time? The kid that was pinned up against the wall in the shower against his will. That's who needed backing, Franco Harris.
The comments by Harris. He can't mean what he's saying there.
It goes on.
He's not thinking. I can't imagine. I didn't read the article, but he can't be truly thinking about. He's got to be speaking before he knows all the facts.
He couldn't be thinking at all because he was also critical of the state police commissioner, Frank Noonan, who suggested that Paterno had a moral obligation to report Sandusky had sexually assaulted. I don't need to go into the details again, but he says Noonan suggested that there was a moral obligation to Paterno, and I will quote Harris, when I heard that, it blew my mind. Why would they bring the moral into the legal? Now everyone gets to interpret it their own way. That's what really bothers me. Joe did what was right for him to do. He forwarded the information to his superiors. That's the legal procedure at Penn State. If I had to choose today between the moral integrity and character of Joe Paterno and the politicians and commentators criticizing him, I would pick Joe Paterno, hands down, no contest every time. How the hell do you look at a case like this and say you have to separate the moral from the legal?
I say stupid comments like Franco's making. He actually belongs in politics. He ought to run for president. He ought to run for Congress or something because stupid comments like that. He belongs running our country like the rest of them. He's not thinking. He's just not thinking clearly.
Now everyone gets to interpret it in their own way. What's left to interpret? And why shouldn't we? Do you want it? In other words, he's spoken like a politician mated with an attorney, and the offspring was the worst of both. Because lawyers confuse, and they try to get us to confuse two terms, which are absolutely not similar. One is innocent, the other is not guilty. Correct. Those two things are not the same. You know what I mean? O.J. Simpson was found not guilty. He was not innocent. Period. Regardless of what happens here, Joe Paterno, if he was tried for what he did, would he be found guilty? No, he'd be found not guilty. Somebody want to call the show and tell me Joe Paterno is innocent? Good luck.
Franco Harris, you're out there?
Yeah, if you're listening.
I hope you call.
Yeah, Franco, I dare you. I double dare you.
Stupid comments, Franco.
The only thing he said that made sense was he's talking about how McQueary was handled. And he said, and this is where I'll quote Harris again, people make fun of the fact that Mike went to his father like a little kid. Because somebody went to a confidant, why is that childish? How Mike handled that situation, there is nothing I can comment on. People are different. Some people would have bashed Sandusky's head in. Mike followed procedure. Because some people higher up didn't do their job, he's suffering the consequences. I got to tell you, while I think McQueary also should have done more, like maybe, I don't know, go to the police when you witness a rape, that call me crazy. I'm old-fashioned that way. I see a rape, I'm going to the cops.
Yeah.
All right, just call me crazy. But I will tell you, at the time, McQueary was a graduate assistant, younger guy, and I will say, because I used the term of a janitor also witnessed something else happening, and this guy was a war veteran. And when he told his coworkers, he used the words, I've seen people with their guts hanging out, and I've never seen it. That's a shaking moment for a young guy.
Agreed.
But at the same time,
you say McQuarrie was a young guy. He was 28 years old. As I said earlier in the show, I could consider giving him a pass if he was 19. No, not a pass. I mean, but I could consider understanding what he did and only going to the administration if he was 19 years old. He's 28, man. He's got to know at that point what is right and what is wrong and the course of action that needs to be taken.
He should have stepped up when nothing else happened. But if you're a graduate assistant in the football program at Penn State University and you bring something like this to the ultimate father figure, the ultimate figure of morality and high standards, Joe Paterno, I would like to think, because they did say there was an investigation. So if you're McQuarrie and you say, I brought it to Joe Paterno and there's an investigation, I would probably, as McQuarrie, think I did my job. Doesn't mean later in life he couldn't have. My guess is he was probably what everybody else in that place is, afraid of Joe Paterno and afraid if he speaks up he loses his job.
Agreed.
So doesn't let you off the hook, by the way, McQuarrie.
No, and
he's probably listening because he's not coaching today. So he's probably saying
he's going to pay the ultimate price for his career. Now he will likely not coach again, and I wonder if this guy can come out of hiding again, because again there are a lot of people that are going to want his head because they don't feel he did enough, and at the time maybe he did think he was doing enough or doing the right thing by taking it, again, to his father, then to Joe. But in hindsight, he's got to believe, much like Paterno, hey, I wish I had done more here.
And we all listen. The reality of this is we all wish that it just never even happened. But more importantly, it's so. And this isn't a case of hindsight being 20/20. You've got to, as any person with a single vertebrae of moral backbone, nobody can say that more shouldn't have been done on everybody's part. On everybody's part, from the top down. Sandusky, I don't care how sick you are, because, again, read the grand jury report. There are kids who basically would turn away when he would grope at them. I mean, did this guy want to get caught? I mean, and then you're talking about the president of the college, who definitely, what investigation? That's the other thing. They launched an investigation in 2002. Well, you know what? They forgot to call Coach Tony. Because if I was in that investigation, McQuarrie, what did you see? Good. Investigation at minute 2. Over. And I would have hung the guy next to the Joe Paterno statue and gladly gone to jail for the rest of my life for it. And Steve, you said it before. If you have a kid, this is a no-brainer. By the way, the other thing the president said, which was stupid, talked about having unconditional support for the coaches. You know what? Does he know what that word means? Yeah. Unconditional means I know they're guilty and I support them anyway.
Right.
The only person who's allowed to be unconditional is a parent. My kid murders somebody, I'm going to know it's wrong, still my kid.
You're going to love him.
I'm still going to love him. But outside of that relationship, there is no unconditional.
What was Sandusky doing with an office on Penn State campus up until like 2007?
Well, because of how long he was there, he achieved emeritus status.
Oh, so he gets an office, and
he got an office, and apparently there was an assistant coach's shower room where a lot of this stuff took place. He had all the tickets to the bowl games, the suites. He could put people on his list. The only thing he wasn't doing anymore was standing on the sideline coaching. Everything else was exactly the same. He had a Penn State email address. He had an office. He had a phone. He shared assistant. He had all that stuff. And again, for the administration there to knowingly say, whether they meant to say it or not, take your camp and move it somewhere else.
Coach,
good luck sleeping tonight. Good luck sleeping tonight.
Yeah, Penn State's got a long road to hoe, and it's not going to be pretty. And it's a shame that so many truly innocent people, like a lot of all the alum, there's so many truly innocent people are going to pay a dear price, just in terms of reputation of the school and all.
And the most innocent being the kids whose innocence was taken from them. I can't imagine.
I can't of unspeakable proportions.
I can't. And by the way, in the odd chance that there's a victim out there who hasn't come forward yet and is hearing this show, boy, you know what? I think and I'm saying this just to make myself feel better. Come out, explain what happened. There are people who genuinely care. There is no shame in what happened to you as a 10-year-old kid. You were manipulated and forcibly made to do things by an adult figure. There's no shame. The only way to make this thing go away is to just make sure this guy is absolutely prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. This kid in Texas who apparently just came out, good for you. My guess is you go through the whole conference, there's a kid in each city that this guy tried to touch or do something with. And if, don't be an altar boy, no pun intended. There's nothing wrong with coming out and making sure this guy rots in a jail cell for the rest of his miserable life. Like I said, not a hot enough place in hell. If it is ever made public where he goes to prison, I will be there. I will be there for his internal conjugal visits from his cellmates. I want a camera. You want to make you want to make a reality show? Put a camera in Sandusky's cell and watch ratings go through the roof. Man, this was, you know what, Steve, it was great to have you on the show, man. It was a real pleasure. I unfortunately, we had to cover this one, and I'm sorry we had to. Listen, next week we're going to be talking with Dan Gray, the proprietor of Pro Swing, who is running a great program for college-bound, highly academic athletes. You're not going to want to miss that. So tune in next Saturday and every Saturday at 9 a.m. for Hey Coach Tony. Enjoy the rest of the weekend, everybody.